Mausoleosis is an RPG-style horror game in which you must solve puzzles to escape being trapped inside a mausoleum that's crawling with flesh-eating ghouls, one of which happens to be very familiar to the main character. But maybe the most dangerous thing isn't the ghouls at all. While I usually dive into games like this from beginning to end, I thought it would be easier to share the story with you chronologically to better put the clues together that are found throughout each level. The developer has also publicly stated which is the true ending to the story, so we'll be following the canon route. So this is your spoiler warning because we're covering all the details of Mausoleosis. Now, let's get started. For over 100 years, a mysterious cult has controlled a small rural town. Every mayor in this town's history has been part of the cult's coven, and the mausoleum, which is a large building that houses multiple tombs, has been the main headquarters. They control the town, and their primary goal is to awaken their lord, an inherently evil entity that would wreak havoc and devastation on the world if released. Fast forward to 1995, and the newest cult leader has a prophecy. He predicts that his wife Dana will give birth to the perfect vessel for their lord. Dana gives birth to a boy a year later, and shortly after, the cult leader takes his own life. Why he does so is unknown. Perhaps it was necessary to wake the entity to add to the trauma of this child. Regardless of the reason, Dana was then placed in charge of the cult, but the rest of the members are far from pleased. They felt that Dana was nothing like their leader. Nevertheless, they followed her orders, and once the child David turned 7 years old, she began to do unspeakable things to him in an effort to wake their lord, using pain and trauma as catalysts. She would press pins and needles into his gums, pressing them deeper as he cried out in pain. When she wasn't physically torturing him, she would lock him away in a narrow space filled with roaches. All of this happening to a 7-year-old child. David endured this pain for a while until one day it no longer hurt him. Something within him snapped, and no matter how hard she pressed, he would no longer cry out. Dana stopped the torture after that, after realizing that her plan had failed. The cult's lord was not awakening, and Dana had to be punished for it. She was killed by the cult and buried in the same mausoleum that was used as their primary headquarters. It was then decided that David would be relocated with a cult member who would pose as David's aunt. It's assumed he received relatively normal care after that point, as he doesn't mention being tortured by her, and after he became an adult, he moved away to the city. He began to live out his dreams. He works as a photographer for fashion magazines and even has his own private studio. The cult's new task was to lure David, their vessel, back to the town in which he was born so that they could finally awaken their lord. They have been seeing signs of his return within the mausoleum, flesh-eating ghouls and ghosts wandering the halls and other happenings that we'll get into later. The caretaker's assistant of the mausoleum even recalled hearing the voice of a woman calling for someone, so they sent him a letter. It reads, "David, please come for me. I'm alone and scared. I don't want to be here any longer. I'll be waiting for you. Please hurry. Mom." However, as you recall, David's mother has been dead for 20 years. David wants to ignore it, to consider it a cruel prank, but he can't. No one in the city knew about his mother or the torture he endured, and something is compelling him to return to the mausoleum. He does so and runs into Iris, a young woman who has grown up in this town and is searching for her lost cat. David tells her to leave as she shouldn't be at the mausoleum, and Iris feels that he is being rude. They both try to open the doors to the outside, but they're locked. Iris, needing to find her cat Whiskers and not trusting David, runs away from him. David then decides to follow her. Once he reaches her, she tells him about her mistrust due to his uncaring and unemotional demeanor about her lost cat. David apologizes, claiming that he's been through a lot and not very good at social situations, and agrees to help her locate Whiskers, provided they also look for an exit. He also tells Iris about the letter that he received, and we learn that he believes that maybe Dana isn't dead at all. Suddenly, a voice calls to him from the tomb his mother was buried in, only it isn't her, but something grotesque and evil that looks like her. She chases after David and Iris, only stopping once David enters a room and blocks the doorway. Iris comments that Dana looked like a monster, and David tells her the truth of his childhood. David says that he is almost grateful to her for the abuse, however, because he says that it made him stronger. Iris remembers her grandfather's stories, one of which was about a ghoul. It's an undead monster that forms when someone is really evil and passes away, and their malice turns them into a ghoul, causing them to feed on human flesh while they lurk in places the dead have been laid to rest. While deciding how to escape the room you're both trapped in, you can choose to either talk to Iris or to remain silent. If you're friendly, we learn that Iris has lived in this town most of her life, moving in with her grandfather after both of her parents died shortly after she was born. Her grandfather passed away when she was 21, and she now works in a bakery to follow in his footsteps, though she desires to be a model one day. David reassures her about finding Whiskers, and she comments that maybe he's a good guy after all. But we're following the canonical route, so stay silent and David will think about how annoying Iris is and is rude to her. He'll tell her that he'll help her find her cat, but she shouldn't expect him to be all nice and friendly to her. He has to go on though, because there's still so much to do. After this conversation, Whiskers appears out of a hole in the wall and David realizes that there must be a hidden room. He finds the door, but there's no time to celebrate because Mommy Dearest has returned and she's ready to eat them both alive. David, Iris, and Whiskers run through the door and seal the hallways, trapping Dana on the other side. They then find a dark opening in one of the rooms and David volunteers to check it out because he feels this is a test to compare his strength to his childhood torture. It's a small, cramped tunnel and there are numerous rats at the end of it, but there's also a rusty key. David turns to go back to Iris, but the floor gives out beneath him and he lands in an unfamiliar part of the mausoleum. He then finds a switch to open a hallway, and then Iris, who doesn't quite seem like herself, runs away from him again without speaking. At one point, the screen becomes distorted and a dark silhouette of David with red eyes follows behind him, only to disappear as he reaches the graves of the innocent. He pays his respects to all 4 graves and makes his way back to the true Iris and Whiskers. In another room, the mirrors on the wall begin to shatter. This reminds Iris of another story from her grandfather about vampires who can't be near mirrors too long or they shatter. David says to Hope that there are no vampires here, but curiously, the mirrors only shatter when David steps past them. They then find another room for David, Iris, and Whiskers to rest a while. Iris asks David what he saw when he fell through the tunnel, and he confesses that he saw her, and this version of her asked him to pay his respects to the innocents. He believes it was all just a hallucination, and perhaps it was. Making small talk, Iris asks David what kind of photographer he is and confesses to wanting to be a model. David is cruel to her and tells her that she is ugly and that he can't help but being honest, and Iris's resentment for him grows. She tells him that her first impression of him was right and that he isn't a good person. She decides that she needs to get away from him as soon as possible, and they leave this room to find a new hallway filled with puzzles to solve. But going through the door at the very end of the hall will bring our characters face to face with another ghoul hell-bent on eating them. They solve this floor's series of puzzles, one of which involves carving into the flesh of a corpse to retrieve a flesh key that will unlock a new area. The person died recently and has bites and lacerations all over them. Iris suggests that he's the caretaker, and David replies that it's a possibility, but we can't know for sure. They both consider that Dana killed him, but it could have been her or any of the other spirits and ghouls haunting the place. Iris is also disturbed at how easily David can carve into the corpse. Using the flesh key, they enter another hallway and find a new room to wait in after seeing the forest beyond the graveyard through the windows. David has the chance to apologize to Iris for his behavior, but says nothing, and all she wants to do is get away from him at this point. They then find a staircase in one of the rooms, and within it are long-necked spirits. David says they won't attack, and he's right. At the end of this room is the Jade Key, but Iris has a really bad feeling about this place, and David hears something calling to him. David, vide intra animam tuam, it says, which roughly translates to see into your soul. The scene flashes back to David in his private studio, and David's face shifts. His true colors are shown as he holds a knife and leers toward a model. "Please, show me your soul," he says to her, before a blood-curdling scream can be heard. A gruesome sight lays before us as David has dismembered the model, gleefully exclaiming that now he can finally capture her soul with his camera. The voice returns to David saying, "Apportete darein," You must give in. How many souls did you photograph? To which David replies, a lot. A lot is not enough, the entity says. There's still a bit of humanity left in you. It's time to get rid of it. It's time for me to take over forever. David asks the entity what its name is, but it replies that his name shall not be spoken. I've always been with you since the moment you were born, he says. You only exist to be my vessel. It's time, David. Give in. Stop struggling. Let me take over this body we share. To receive the canonical ending, David must resist the entity trying to take over. If not, he kills Iris right then and there. He tells the entity to shut up, that he won't let anyone have full control over his body. Then David and Iris return to puzzle solving, one of which involves a severed hand that David must cut the finger off of and use it to unlock the final room. As they exit the hallway, an eerie picture flashes across the screen of a man with blackened eyes, a man assumed to be the cult leader and David's father. In the final hallway, the motherly ghoul returns and asks David why she wants to leave him. There's a very bad monster inside of you, David, she says. The pins and needles were supposed to awaken him, but it didn't work. But maybe, if she removes David's tongue, the entity will finally awaken. David and Iris run, and David stabs the ghoul with the gates that seal the hallway. Iris says that ghouls can still be killed with violence. David, however, wanted to hear more screams from his mother. At the doorway, David confesses that he really wanted to lure Iris to his apartment, but he knows she doesn't trust him. That's why he has to do it here and now. Holding the knife, he states that he's not a good person. There's a monster inside of him, and it's hungry. I've killed a lot of pathetic girls like you over the years, he says. People with low self-esteem are easy to manipulate. He wants to see Iris's soul and keep her eyeballs as a souvenir, saying prior that eyes are the windows to the soul, and Iris has a beautiful soul. Iris and David struggle, but Iris manages to stab him with the knife. Your trauma doesn't justify the harm you did, she tells him. Just like your mother made you stronger, you made me stronger as well. Leaving the mausoleum, Iris contemplates if she should tell the police or risk having herself exposed to the cult. The game ends, and the end text says the bodies of David and his mother were never found. The developer confirmed that this is because David didn't actually die. The entity within him was awakened when Iris stabbed him, and maybe he saved Dana the ghoul as thanks for completing most of the pain and traumatic process to bring him to life. This was a pretty clear-cut game, and the developer answered my primary question instead of me having to dig around and theorize about what truly happened to David. So instead of a large theory portion to this video, I thought I would summarize some of my thoughts and mini theories about this game. So throughout the choices in the game, making Iris distrust David will ensure her survival, but gaining her trust by being nice to her and learning more about her life will cause her to love and move in with David, and she will ultimately be murdered by him as a result. And I know this isn't the developer's message, right? It's just an unfortunate ending that happens all too much in reality. But I do want to reiterate that victims who trust and believe in their murderers are not at fault for what happens to them. Real-life people like this, like David, are masters of manipulation. And if you play through and choose the options to grow closer to Iris, you can see that he plays on her insecurities, calling her beautiful and telling her that he can help her become a model, essentially playing the role of Iris's knight in shining armor. He knows who to target because he knows from experience that he has a better chance of using people's self-esteem to gain their trust. And we see from the canonical ending that even if Iris mistrusts David, he still attacks. Her life is in danger either way, not because she chose to believe him or not, but because he chose her as his next target. It's David's fault, not Iris or any of his other victims. Knowing how deranged David is now when he comments on how beautiful Iris's eyes are and how he wants to capture the beauty of the soul and how all dreams matter, it just gives his dialogue a whole new sinister light. Then he also tells Iris that he grew up and followed his dreams, and it seems like he's talking about photographing souls and killing women instead of just moving to the city to be a photographer. Now, this is not so much a theory, but in one of the first rooms David explores in the mausoleum, there's a book that says rats feel attracted to death, just like we do. And I found it interesting that as you continue throughout the game, the rats begin to bump into David more and more after initially avoiding him in the beginning. And I'm not saying that David is dead himself at this point, but perhaps the rats can sense all of the death that he's caused and created. And then there's the notes left behind by the cult members and the caretaker's assistant. Throughout the game, we read these notes to learn about the past and to learn that the caretaker's assistant will do what he can to follow orders and to avoid ending up like his predecessor. So we know that the previous assistant died, and I believe that he may be the corpse in the mausoleum that David carves into to find the flesh key. Iris suggests it's the caretaker himself, but David isn't so sure. Also, someone had to lock David and Iris inside, and perhaps it was the current assistant, doing the bidding of the cult to remain alive. Finally, while we can assume that Iris's grandfather died of natural causes when she turned 21, I also wondered if perhaps the cult had something to do with his death. He just seemed to know a lot about the town, about the fact that the town was being ran by a cult. He knew about ghouls and even vampires, which, not saying that David or the entity is a vampire, but they do seem to have similar traits as far as breaking mirrors and the whole concept of having a soul, having no soul, being evil, just being a vessel for a soul. It's kind of going hand in hand with being a vampire, and it's just really interesting. But I want to know what you think. David was already murdering people, fulfilling his own desires before the entity fully takes over. But do you think that evil is born, or was it created as a result of Dana's torture? And if evil is created, then why isn't everyone who has experienced pain and trauma committing sinister deeds? Is it about power, taking control of our lives? Does it depend on the support that person has in the aftermath or their own psyche? And what did you think about the game as a whole? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Here's another one of my videos, and as always, thanks for watching.